Woman feeds stray German Shepherd at farmer's market. The next day, he shows up at her door with a surprising gift. Subscribe to our channel and comment where you're watching from. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of fresh produce and artisanal bread through the bustling Sunday farmer's market in Burlington, Vermont. Eleanor Matthews, a slender woman of 68 with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, navigated between the colorful stalls with practiced ease. 40 years of teaching biology had left her with a keen eye for detail and a methodical approach to life, even in retirement. "Morning, Mrs. Matthews. Got your usual sourdough today?" called Sam, the ruddy-faced baker who'd known her since she began teaching his daughter 20 years ago. "Yes, please," Eleanor replied, her voice soft but clear, and perhaps a bit extra. She paid for her bread and made her way to her favorite bench overlooking Lake Champlain. The October sun cast golden light across the water as she unwrapped her turkey sandwich. That's when she noticed him, a large German Shepherd with intelligent eyes and a distinguished gray muzzle, standing at a distance from the crowd. Market-goers gave the dog a wide berth, some pulling their children closer as they passed. "Poor thing," Eleanor whispered to herself. "You're just misunderstood, aren't you?" Acting on impulse that surprised even herself, Eleanor tore off a piece of turkey and held it out. The dog watched her warily, then approached with cautious dignity. As he accepted the offering, his amber eyes locked with hers, a gaze so penetrating and knowing that Eleanor felt a chill run through her. "You've seen things, haven't you?" she murmured. The dog sat beside her bench, maintaining a respectful distance but no longer aloof. For the next hour, Eleanor shared bits of her lunch, speaking in quiet tones about the lake, the changing leaves, and her empty cottage where silence had reigned since Robert passed 3 years ago. "Ma'am, you shouldn't feed that dog," a market security guard approached, hand resting cautiously on his belt. "He's been hanging around for weeks. Nobody knows where he came from. He's not causing any trouble," Eleanor replied, straightening her posture, the same stance she'd used when facing down unruly high schoolers. "Just be careful. Animal control's been called a few times, but he always disappears before they arrive." The guard shook his head. "Smart animal. Too smart, maybe." As the market began to close, Eleanor reluctantly gathered her things. "I have to go now," she told the dog, feeling slightly foolish for conversing with him. "Take care of yourself." The shepherd watched her leave, his posture alert and dignified. The following morning, Eleanor was arranging freshly cut hydrangeas from her garden when she heard scratching at her front door. Coffee cup in hand, she peered through the peephole, seeing nothing. The scratching continued. "Who's there?" she called, then cautiously opened the door. The German Shepherd from the market stood on her porch, something clutched gently in his mouth. A small, weather-worn purse in faded blue leather. His eyes, intelligent and urgent, seemed to plead with her. "Well," Eleanor said, her heart racing with unexpected excitement. "It seems we have unfinished business." She stepped aside, and for the first time in 3 years, invited someone new into her home. Eleanor carefully took the purse from the dog's mouth, surprised by how gently he released it. The German Shepherd sat on her hardwood floor, his posture straight and attentive, watching her every move with unnerving intensity. "Let's see what you've brought me," she murmured, setting the purse on her dining table, a polished oak piece that had witnessed decades of lesson planning and solitary meals. The leather was weather-worn but of good quality, with a tarnished clasp that opened with a soft click. Inside, Eleanor found a Vermont driver's license belonging to Adrian Caldwell, age 42, with an address in Middlesbury, about 30 miles south. Beneath it lay a faded photograph, a smiling family of 3 standing beside the very same German Shepherd, considerably younger. The dog in the picture wore a blue collar with a silver tag reading Ranger. "Is that your name, Ranger?" Eleanor asked. The dog's ears perked up, and he gave a single bark of confirmation. "Well, Ranger, where is your family?" Eleanor continued examining the contents and discovered a slip of paper with an address scrawled on the back of the photograph. It wasn't the Middlesbury address from the license, but somewhere much closer, on the outskirts of Burlington, near the Champlain wetlands. Her phone rang, startling both of them. It was her daughter, Caroline. "Mom, are we still on for dinner Thursday? Lily's dying to tell you about her environmental law internship." "Of course," Eleanor replied, her eyes still fixed on the dog. "Caroline, What would you say if I told you there was a German Shepherd in my living room right now? The pause was palpable. Mom, are you okay? Do you need me to come over? I'm perfectly fine, Eleanor said, straightening her shoulders. Just experiencing something unexpected. I'll tell you all about it on Thursday. After hanging up, Eleanor made a decision. Let's find out where this address leads, shall we, Ranger? 30 minutes later, Eleanor's sensible Subaru pulled up to a small farmhouse set back from the road. Paint peeled from the clapboards, and tall grass surrounded the structure. Ranger leapt from the car the moment she opened the door, racing toward the house with purpose. Wait, Eleanor called, following as quickly as her arthritic knees allowed. The property was clearly abandoned, windows boarded, mailbox overflowing. Ranger circled the house, sniffing intently, then headed directly to the backyard. There, beneath an ancient maple tree, he began to dig frantically. What are you doing? Stop that. Eleanor hurried over, then froze as Ranger's paws unearthed something, a waterproof container. Eleanor's hands trembled as she opened it, revealing a leather-bound journal protected from the elements. She flipped it open, her teacher's eyes scanning quickly. Property of James Caldwell, environmental engineer, she read aloud. The journal detailed James's work analyzing the wetlands surrounding Lake Champlain and his growing alarm when he discovered that Northeastern Development Corporation was falsifying environmental impact reports for a massive resort project. They're threatening me now, one entry read. Called the house today while Adrian and Mia were home. Said they knew where Mia goes to school. We have to leave. If anything happens, the real reports are hidden where only Ranger knows. Eleanor looked up at the dog, who stared back with solemn understanding. They had to flee, she whispered. And they left you behind to what? Guard their secrets? Ranger whined softly, pressing his muzzle against her hand. What happened to you, boy? Where have you been all this time? As sunset painted the abandoned property in golden hues, Eleanor made another uncharacteristic decision. Come on, Ranger. Let's go home while I figure this out. Eleanor's cottage underwent a subtle transformation over the following weeks. Ranger's sturdy bed occupied the corner of her living room. A blue leash hung by the door, and dog toys, purchased during an uncharacteristically impulsive shopping spree, were scattered across her once immaculate floors. For a woman who had lived alone since her husband's passing, the change was profound. I never thought I'd share my space again, she confessed to Ranger one evening as they sat on her porch overlooking the garden. The German Shepherd rested his head on her knee, his eyes conveying an understanding that sometimes startled her. Eleanor devoted her evenings to studying James Caldwell's journal, her reading glasses perched on her nose, a notepad filling with her neat handwriting. The journal revealed the Caldwell family's desperate flight 3 years earlier, after James had uncovered damning evidence that Northeastern Development Corporation's planned luxury resort would devastate the Champlain wetlands ecosystem. The wetlands serve as natural flood control, she read aloud. NDC's modifications would redirect water flow, potentially endangering surrounding communities during spring melt. Her phone rang, interrupting her research. The caller ID showed Burlington Gazette. Mrs. Matthews? This is Daniel Reynolds. I understand you've been making inquiries about the Lakeshore Heights development project? Eleanor's spine stiffened. How did you get this number, Mr. Reynolds? Small town, he replied smoothly. I'm doing a feature on local development. I heard you visited the planning office asking questions. I'm merely interested in how the project might affect the wetlands, Eleanor said carefully. As a retired biology teacher, with all due respect, Mrs. Matthews, these developers bring jobs and revenue. Not everyone can afford to worry about some birds and frogs. The dismissive tone in his voice triggered something in Eleanor, a spark of the passion that had once made her the most respected teacher at Burlington High. Those birds and frogs, Mr. Reynolds, maintain an ecosystem that prevents flooding, filters our water, and sustains wildlife that draws tourists to our community. Perhaps you should do your research before dismissing matters you clearly don't understand. She hung up, hands trembling. Ranger pressed against her leg supportively. Well, that wasn't very polite of me, was it? She whispered, scratching behind his ears. Your previous owner has me fighting battles I never thought would be mine. The following day, Eleanor drove to the Burlington Environmental Protection Office, where she'd spent summers volunteering during her teaching years. The receptionist, Jenny, brightened when she entered. Mrs. Matthews, Haven't seen you since the retirement party. What brings you back? I need to see the public records for the Champlain Northeastern Wetlands, Eleanor replied. Particularly anything regarding the Lakeshore Heights development. Jenny's smile faded. That's become a sensitive subject around here. How so? Jenny lowered her voice. Director Williams was pushing back hard against that project, then suddenly retired early. His replacement approved everything within weeks. She glanced around nervously. Between us, funding for our monitoring programs was cut right after. Eleanor felt a chill. Who's the developer? Northeastern Development Corporation. CEO is Margaret Whitfield. The name hit Eleanor like a physical blow. Maggie Whitfield. Are you certain? You know her? Eleanor's mind flashed back 50 years, to college dorm rooms, shared dreams of changing the world, and promises to never sell out. Margaret Whitfield had been her roommate, her confidant, her closest friend, until a falling out over values had separated them decades ago. We were acquainted. Once. That evening, Eleanor created a detailed map on her dining room table, connecting dates and events from the journal with newspaper clippings and printouts from the environmental office. Ranger watched intently as she worked. Your family discovered something that powerful people wanted hidden, she told him, determination hardening in her voice. And now, it seems, so have I. Morning light streamed through Eleanor's kitchen windows as she prepared breakfast, one bowl of oatmeal for herself, one dish of premium dog food for Ranger. Her once precise routine had adapted to accommodate her new companion, and she found herself rising earlier, walking more, and sleeping better than she had in years. The kitchen phone rang at precisely 8:07 a.m. Eleanor Matthews speaking. Ellie? It's Maggie Whitfield. Eleanor's hand tightened around the receiver. The familiar voice, still commanding after all these years, transported her instantly to their college days. Margaret, she replied, her tone carefully neutral. This is unexpected. I heard you've been asking questions about the Lakeshore project, Margaret said, bypassing pleasantries. I thought we should talk. How enterprising of you to track me down. Burlington hasn't grown that much, Ellie. Besides, I make it my business to know when someone takes an interest in my investments. Eleanor watched as Ranger entered the kitchen, his posture stiffening, a low growl emanating from his throat. Your dog has good instincts, Margaret commented, and Eleanor realized with a start that she could be seen from the kitchen window. Glancing out, she spotted a sleek black SUV parked across the street. Are you watching my house, Margaret? I'm offering to meet for coffee, like civilized people. The Lakeside Cafe in an hour. Against her better judgment, Eleanor agreed. As she hung up, Ranger placed himself between her and the window, his amber eyes vigilant. I know, she told him, scratching behind his ears. I don't trust her either. The Lakeside Cafe occupied prime real estate along Burlington's waterfront. Eleanor arrived precisely on time, choosing a table with a clear view of the door and the lake beyond. Margaret was already waiting, elegant in a tailored gray suit that probably cost more than Eleanor's monthly pension. Ellie, Margaret rose, arms outstretched for an embrace that Eleanor sidestepped, offering a handshake instead. It's Eleanor now, she corrected, taking a seat. No one's called me Ellie since college. Margaret's smile remained fixed as she sat down. You look well. Retirement suits you. Let's dispense with the pretense, Margaret. Why am I here? The waitress arrived, and Margaret ordered an espresso with practiced ease. Eleanor requested tea. Once they were alone, Margaret leaned forward. I understand you found some items belonging to a former employee of mine. A journal, perhaps? And you've befriended his dog. How would you know that? James Caldwell worked for one of my subsidiary companies. He had some mental health issues toward the end of his employment. Became paranoid, made accusations. Margaret's manicured hand waved dismissively. We tried to help him, but he disappeared with his family. Left the dog behind, apparently. Eleanor felt her teacher's instinct for detecting lies activate. That's not what his journal suggests. A journal written by a troubled man, Margaret countered smoothly. I'm concerned about you, Ellie. Getting involved in this situation could be uncomfortable for someone in your position. What position would that be? A respected retired teacher living on a fixed income. A woman who's always preferred peace to confrontation. Margaret's voice softened. I remember how you hated conflict, even when we were young. People change, Eleanor replied, though her heart hammered in her chest. Indeed they do. Margaret removed a checkbook from her designer handbag. I'm prepared to offer $20,000 for that diary and any other items you might have found. A finder's fee, if you will. Eleanor stared at her former friend, truly seeing the stranger she'd become. Are you attempting to bribe me, Margaret? I'm trying to resolve an uncomfortable situation quietly, Margaret responded, sliding a business card across the table. Think about it. That amount could fund some lovely traveling in your golden years. As Eleanor left the cafe, she spotted a man in a dark jacket watching her from across the street. He lifted a phone to his ear as she passed, speaking in hushed tones. Back home, Eleanor found Ranger waiting anxiously at the door. As she recounted the meeting, the German shepherd's ears pricked forward, his intelligent eyes never leaving her face. What would your family think of me if I took that money, Ranger? She asked, stroking his fur. What would I think of myself? That night, Eleanor's phone rang again. When she answered, the line remained silent for several seconds before a male voice spoke. Mrs. Matthews, some advice from a concerned citizen. Dogs get lost all the time. So do retirees. Stay out of it. The line went dead, leaving Eleanor trembling in her kitchen, Ranger pressing protectively against her legs. Thursday evening brought Caroline's visit, along with Eleanor's 24-year-old granddaughter, Lily, a passionate environmental law student at Vermont Law School with her grandmother's analytical mind and none of her natural caution. The moment she spotted Ranger, Lily dropped to her knees in delight. Gran, you got a dog and didn't tell us. She buried her fingers in Ranger's thick fur as the German shepherd regarded her with dignified approval. Eleanor exchanged a glance with Caroline, who raised an eyebrow. This is quite the departure from your usual lifestyle, Mom. It's complicated, Eleanor replied, leading them to the dining room where dinner waited. Ranger settled vigilantly at her feet. Over roast chicken and vegetables, Eleanor recounted the past week's events, producing the journal and the map she'd created. Caroline listened with growing concern, while Lily's expression transformed from curiosity to excitement. Gran, this is serious, Lily exclaimed. NDC has developments across New England, and they're notorious for environmental violations. But catching them red-handed has been nearly impossible. This isn't your battle, Mom, Caroline interjected. That call was clearly a threat. You should take this to the police. With what evidence? Eleanor countered. A journal from a man who disappeared 3 years ago? A dog that showed up at my door? They'd think I was a confused old woman. She's right, Lily said, already photographing pages of the journal with her phone. Police won't act without solid evidence. But these notes, if we could find the original environmental surveys James mentioned. Eleanor asked. Lily's eyes sparkled with determination. My environmental law clinic is looking for a project. This could be perfect. Plus, I've got 2 weeks before spring semester starts. Absolutely not, Caroline objected. Mom, tell her this is dangerous. But Eleanor was studying her granddaughter, recognizing the same fire that had once driven her own teaching career. What would you need to build a case? Mom, Caroline protested. I'm not encouraging recklessness, Eleanor assured her daughter. But if there's legitimate legal action to be taken, we'd need the original, unaltered environmental impact reports, Lily explained. Proof the company knew about the dangers and concealed them. And ideally, evidence connecting Margaret Whitfield directly to the cover-up. Caroline sighed, recognizing defeat. Promise me you'll both be careful. And keep me informed. Later that night, after Caroline departed with reluctant goodbyes, Eleanor and Lily spread their materials across the dining table. Ranger watched from his position near Eleanor's chair, occasionally shifting his gaze to the windows as if standing guard. The journal mentions something about the Real reports are hidden where only Ranger knows, Lily noted, scanning the photocopied pages. What do you think that means? Eleanor thoughtfully scratched behind Ranger's ears. He led me to the journal. Perhaps he can lead us to the reports as well. The following morning, armed with travel mugs of coffee and Ranger secured in the back seat, they drove to the abandoned Caldwell home. The property looked even more forlorn in the gray winter light. Someone's been here, Eleanor observed, noticing fresh tire tracks in the muddy driveway. Recently, too, Lily agreed, her voice hushed. Maybe we should come back another time? Eleanor hesitated, but Ranger was already whining anxiously, pawing at the car door. When they released him, he bolted toward the house. not to the backyard where the journal had been buried, but around to a weathered shed nearly hidden by overgrown bushes. The padlock on the shed had been broken, the interior ransacked. Empty shelves and scattered tools suggested a thorough search. They were looking for something, Lily whispered. Ranger paced the dirt floor, sniffing intently until he reached the back corner. There, he began to dig with single-minded determination. Should we stop him? Lily asked. Eleanor shook her head. I think he knows exactly what he's doing. After several minutes of frantic digging, Ranger's paws struck something solid. Eleanor knelt beside him, ignoring the protest from her knees, and brushed away the loose dirt to reveal a metal box. It looks like a safe deposit box, she murmured, lifting it from the hole. Unlike the journal container, this one was locked. Lily examined it closely. We need the key. They searched the shed thoroughly, but found nothing. As they prepared to leave, disappointed, Ranger approached Eleanor and pawed at her jacket pocket, the one containing the small purse he'd originally brought her. Of course, Eleanor breathed, retrieving the purse and emptying its contents. There, attached to a small leather tag, was a key. The drive home was tense, the metal box secure in Eleanor's tote bag. Neither woman spoke much, both aware of the car that had appeared behind them shortly after leaving the Caldwell property, a black SUV maintaining a consistent distance. We're being followed, Lily said quietly. Eleanor checked the rearview mirror. I know. Instead of returning to Eleanor's cottage, she made an unexpected turn toward downtown Burlington. Gran, where are we going? Somewhere public, Eleanor replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. With witnesses and security cameras. She pulled into the parking lot of the Burlington Public Library, her sanctuary for over 40 years, first as a young mother bringing Caroline for story time, then as a teacher researching lesson plans, and now as a retiree attending book clubs. The black SUV drove past slowly but didn't follow them in. Inside, Eleanor nodded to the librarian at the front desk, a former student, and led Lily to a quiet study room in the back. There, with Ranger standing guard at the door, they unlocked the metal box. The metal box contained a USB drive, several folders of meticulously organized documents, and a sealed envelope with "in case of emergency" written in bold letters across the front. Eleanor's hands trembled slightly as she opened the envelope, revealing a handwritten letter. To whom it may concern, she read aloud in a hushed voice. If you're reading this, either I've contacted you directly or something has happened to my family. She exchanged a worried glance with Lily before continuing. My name is James Caldwell, former senior environmental engineer for Vermont Environmental Services, contracted by Northeastern Development Corporation to conduct impact assessments for the Lakeshore Heights project. The documents enclosed provide irrefutable evidence that NDC knowingly falsified reports and bribed officials to approve a development that will catastrophically damage the Champlain wetlands ecosystem and potentially endanger surrounding communities through increased flood risks. Lily was already examining the documents, her expression growing increasingly grave. Gran, these are comprehensive soil studies, water table analyses, wildlife impact assessments, all showing severe environmental concerns. And here, she held up a folder labeled Original Reports, are the unaltered documents submitted to NDC, alongside the modified versions they presented to the state. What's on the USB drive? Eleanor asked. They moved to one of the library's computer stations, where Lily inserted the drive. It contained dozens of email exchanges between NDC executives, including several from Margaret Whitfield herself, explicitly instructing staff to adjust findings and minimize concerns. One particularly damning email discussed payments to regulatory officials. This is explosive, Lily whispered. This is enough for my clinic to request an emergency injunction against further development. A shadow fell across their table. Eleanor looked up to find a broad-shouldered man in a dark jacket standing over them. Mrs. Matthews? Ms. Whitfield would like another word with you. His tone made it clear this wasn't a request. Eleanor felt her breath catch, but decades of managing unruly classrooms had taught her to maintain composure under pressure. Please inform Ms. Whitfield that I'm spending quality time with my granddaughter and cannot be disturbed. The man leaned closer. I don't think you understand the situation. No, I don't think you understand, interrupted a firm voice. The head librarian, Mrs. Patel, appeared beside them, arms crossed. Is there a problem here? The man straightened, assessing the situation, the crowded library, the security cameras overhead, the growing number of curious onlookers. No problem. Just delivering a message. Then consider it delivered, Mrs. Patel replied coldly. Now, unless you have literary interests to pursue, I suggest you exit my library. After he departed, Mrs. Patel turned to Eleanor with concern. Everything all right, Eleanor? Should I call security? No need, Indira. But thank you. Eleanor smiled gratefully at her colleague of 20 years. Though I might need to use your back entrance when we leave. Back at Eleanor's cottage, with doors locked and curtains drawn, they developed a plan. Lily would take copies of the evidence to her law clinic professor, while Eleanor would organize a community meeting to alert residents about the dangers posed by the development. We should move quickly, Lily advised. Once they realize what we have, they'll try to discredit everything. I've taught in this town for 40 years, Eleanor replied. My reputation might count for something. That night, Eleanor's phone rang repeatedly, unknown numbers that she refused to answer. Around midnight, a car drove slowly past her house, pausing briefly before continuing on. Ranger growled from his position by the bedroom window, keeping vigilant watch. They're trying to intimidate us, Eleanor told him, stroking his fur to calm them both. The following morning, Eleanor drove Lily to the bus station for her return to law school. Their goodbye was tense, both aware of the black SUV parked across the street. Be careful, Gran, Lily whispered, hugging her tightly. Professor Harmon is excited about the case. We'll file for an emergency hearing next week. I'll be fine, Eleanor assured her. Just focus on building a strong legal challenge. Back home, Eleanor found a large envelope had been slid under her front door. Inside was a single photograph, Caroline's house in Montpelier, taken that morning, with Caroline visible through the window preparing for work. The message was clear. Eleanor's hands shook as she dialed her daughter's number. Caroline, I need you to listen carefully. Take a few personal days. Go visit your college roommate in Boston. Don't tell anyone where you're going. Mom, what's happening? Just a precaution. Please, trust me. After ensuring Caroline would leave immediately, Eleanor sat at her dining table, Ranger at her feet, and contemplated her next move. The quiet, orderly retirement she had planned seemed a distant memory now. Her home had become command central for an environmental battle, her careful routines replaced by strategy sessions and covert meetings. For the first time in decades, Margaret's voice echoed in her mind from their college days. The difference between us, Ellie, is that you think rules matter. I know it's the rule makers who matter. Eleanor looked down at Ranger, whose intelligent eyes seemed to understand the gravity of her thoughts. Well, boy, she said softly, perhaps it's time to show Margaret that even rule followers have their limits. She reached for her address book and began to make calls, starting with her former colleagues in the science department, local fishermen who depended on the lake's ecosystem, and members of her birdwatching club who had noticed declining waterfowl populations near the development site. The retired teacher was preparing for her most important lesson yet, one on community activism and environmental justice. The Burlington Community Center's meeting room was filled beyond capacity by Wednesday evening. Eleanor stood at the podium, surveying the crowd, former students now grown, colleagues from her teaching days, fishermen in well-worn caps, young environmental activists, and curious neighbors. Ranger sat attentively beside her, his presence lending her an unusual confidence. Margaret had sent another emissary that morning, this time with an increased offer of $50,000. Eleanor had politely declined. Thank you all for coming, Eleanor began, her teacher's voice carrying clearly through the room. For those who don't know me, I'm Eleanor Matthews. I taught biology at Burlington High for 40 years, specializing in local ecosystems. She adjusted her reading glasses, acutely aware of the two men in dark suits standing at the back of the room. I've called this meeting because I've obtained disturbing information about the Lakeshore Heights development project and its potential impact on our wetlands and community. For the next 20 minutes, Eleanor methodically presented the evidence, simplified explanations of water table disruptions, wildlife habitat destruction, and most critically, the compromised flood protection that the natural wetlands provided. The original environmental reports, which were altered before submission to regulatory bodies, indicate that the development's current design could increase flood risk to residential areas by 40% during spring melt. She explained, pointing to enlarged graphs and maps. A hand raised from the middle of the room. Mrs. Matthews, with all due respect, where did you get this information? And why should we believe you over professional developers? Eleanor recognized Frank Miller, the high school principal. Always cautious, always skeptical. A fair question, Frank. These documents came from James Caldwell, the environmental engineer originally hired to assess the project. He preserved the unaltered reports before fleeing Burlington after receiving threats. She gestured to Ranger. This is his family's dog, who led me to the hidden evidence. Murmurs spread through the crowd. That sounds rather fantastic, called a woman near the front, Sandra Reynolds from the local business association. Are you suggesting a dog solved this mystery? Uncomfortable laughter rippled through the audience. Eleanor felt a moment of doubt, seeing skepticism spread across faces. Then she felt a gentle nudge against her leg. Ranger, steady and present. She thought of Caroline, currently driving to Boston. Of Lily, risking her academic reputation to pursue justice. Of James Caldwell's family, driven from their home. I understand your skepticism, Eleanor replied, her voice stronger. That's why I've invited several guests tonight. She introduced Dr. Howard Jenkins, head of hydrology at the University of Vermont, who confirmed the technical accuracy of the flood risk assessments. Next came 3 local fishermen who described alarming changes in fish populations since preliminary construction began. The mood in the room shifted gradually, skepticism giving way to concern, then anger. My family has lived on North Avenue for 4 generations, said Tom Grantham, a gray-haired man Eleanor recognized from the farmer's market. Last spring's floods came closer to our property than ever before. Are you saying this development could make that worse? According to these reports, yes, Eleanor confirmed. As the meeting progressed, Eleanor noticed one of the suited men slipping out, phone pressed to his ear. 20 minutes later, the community center's doors opened, and Margaret Whitfield strode in, commanding attention in her designer coat and perfectly coiffed silver bob. The room fell silent as Margaret approached the front, her heels clicking decisively on the linoleum floor. Ranger's posture stiffened, a low growl emanating from his throat. Good evening, neighbors, Margaret addressed the crowd with practiced charm. I apologize for the interruption, but I felt it important to address these concerning allegations personally. She turned to Eleanor with a tight smile. Ellie, I'm disappointed. If you had concerns about our project, you could have come directly to me instead of alarming the community with outdated and misinterpreted information. The documents speak for themselves, Margaret, Eleanor replied evenly. Documents that may have been altered or taken out of context by a disgruntled former employee with mental health issues, Margaret countered smoothly. Northeastern Development Corporation has always prioritized environmental responsibility. In fact, we've dedicated $10 million to wetland preservation elsewhere in the county. A polished corporate response, delivered with practiced sincerity. Eleanor saw uncertainty return to many faces in the audience. Then, unexpectedly, Mayor Richardson stood up from his seat in the third row. I've reviewed the original plans submitted to the city, and they differ significantly from what Mrs. Matthews has shown us tonight. Can you explain the discrepancies, Ms. Whitfield? Margaret's composure faltered momentarily. Development plans naturally evolve based on new information and engineering requirements. Without resubmitting for approval, the mayor pressed. All modifications were within approved parameters, Margaret insisted, but Eleanor noticed a slight tremor in her hand. The meeting devolved into heated exchanges, with community members peppering Margaret with increasingly pointed questions. Eleanor watched her former friend's carefully constructed facade begin to crack under pressure. As the gathering concluded, people clustered around Eleanor, offering support, sharing contact information, and forming impromptu committees for further action. A local journalist requested an interview, while an environmental advocacy group invited her to speak at their state conference. Margaret departed quickly, but not before approaching Eleanor one last time. This isn't over, Ellie, she said quietly, her voice carrying none of the warmth it had at the cafe. You have no idea what you're up against. Eleanor met her gaze steadily. Perhaps not, but neither do you, Margaret. Outside in the parking lot, Eleanor found her car's tires slashed. A note under the windshield wiper read simply, "Final warning." As she called for a tow service, Ranger pressed protectively against her side, watching the shadows between the streetlights with vigilant attention. The morning after the community meeting, Eleanor awoke to find her front yard transformed. A dozen neighbors, some she recognized, others unfamiliar, were installing security cameras around her property. Tom Grantham from the farmer's market supervised the operation, clipboard in hand. "Morning, Mrs. Matthews," he called, as she stepped onto her porch in bewilderment, Ranger at her heels. "Hope we didn't wake you." "What's all this, Tom?" she asked, clutching her robe tighter against the February chill. "Community protection," he replied matter-of-factly. "After what happened to your car last night, we figured you could use some extra eyes. My son-in-law runs a security company, donated the equipment and installation." Eleanor was momentarily speechless, her composure wavering for the first time in weeks. "I don't know what to say." "No need to say anything. You stood up for us. We're standing up for you." By noon, Eleanor's quiet cottage had become an impromptu campaign headquarters. Her dining room table disappeared beneath maps, documents, and laptops. Her refrigerator filled with casseroles delivered by neighbors. Her phone rang constantly with offers of support and information. "The Burlington Gazette wants an exclusive interview," said Jenny from the Environmental Protection Office, now volunteering her off hours to the cause. "And Channel 9 News is asking about television coverage." Eleanor, who had always shunned the spotlight, found herself thrust into it. "Tell them I'll speak to anyone who'll help spread the truth about the wetlands," she decided. 3 days later, construction equipment appeared at the development site. Massive yellow bulldozers and excavators positioned to begin the next phase of land clearing. Eleanor received dozens of alarmed calls from neighbors. "They're accelerating the schedule," Dr. Jenkins confirmed after visiting the site, "trying to create a fait accompli before legal challenges can take effect." The temporary restraining order Lily's law clinic had filed was pending before a judge, but construction could proceed until a ruling was issued. Eleanor felt a growing sense of urgency as she stared at aerial photographs of the wetlands. "We need more time," she murmured to Ranger, who had barely left her side since the meeting. "Just a few more days until the hearing." That evening, as volunteers departed and Eleanor prepared for her first television interview the following morning, Ranger began behaving strangely. He paced restlessly between the front door and Eleanor, whining with increasing distress. "What is it, boy?" she asked, recognizing his now familiar pattern of communication. "Do you need to go out?" When she opened the door, Ranger bolted into the darkness. Eleanor called after him, but he disappeared into the night, leaving her standing alone on the porch, suddenly aware of how much she'd come to depend on his presence. She barely slept that night, checking the doors repeatedly, jumping at every sound. By morning, with still no sign of Ranger, Eleanor called Tom Grantham. "He's never run off before," she explained, unable to hide the worry in her voice. "I'm concerned something might have happened to him." "I'll organize a search party," Tom promised. "Don't worry, Eleanor. We'll find him." The interview with Channel 9 proceeded as scheduled, though Eleanor felt off balance without Ranger's reassuring presence. She spoke passionately about the wetlands' importance to the region's ecology, emphasizing the flood risks to existing homes. "This isn't just about protecting nature for its own sake," she explained, drawing on 40 years of teaching experience to make complex information accessible. "These wetlands are natural infrastructure that keeps our community safe. Destroying them puts thousands of residents at risk." As cameras rolled, Eleanor's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Check your email now." During the next break, she opened her laptop to find an anonymous message containing internal NDC documents, emails discussing political donations to key officials, strategy memos about fast-tracking the project before environmental fanatics could interfere, and most damning, communications about creating a shell company to absorb any liability from potential flooding incidents. "Who sent this?" she wondered aloud, scrolling through the explosive material. The source remained anonymous, but Eleanor recognized the communication style in the emails. These had come from someone inside NDC, someone with access to Margaret's confidential communications, someone who had clearly developed a conscience. By afternoon, search parties combing the area for Ranger had found nothing. Eleanor tried to focus on organizing the new evidence, but found herself pausing repeatedly to check the windows for any sign of the German Shepherd. As twilight approached on the third day of Ranger's absence, Eleanor sat on her porch swing, wrapped in a blanket against the cold, her eyes scanning the darkening street. The volunteers had gone home, promising to resume searching in the morning. Just as she was about to go inside, she spotted movement at the edge of her property, a familiar silhouette emerging from the shadows. Ranger, moving slowly but deliberately, something clutched in his mouth. "Ranger!" she cried, rushing down the steps despite her aching knees. The German Shepherd approached wearily, his fur matted with mud and what appeared to be marsh water. He gently placed his cargo at her feet, a waterproof case similar to the ones that had contained the journal and documents. "Where have you been?" Eleanor whispered, kneeling to examine him for injuries. Besides exhaustion and minor scratches, he seemed unharmed. Inside the cottage, Eleanor opened the case while Ranger drank water thirstily. It contained a set of blueprints, the original designs for water management systems that had been completely altered in the plans submitted for approval. Attached was a USB drive with drone footage of an area of the wetlands not included in any official surveys. Eleanor connected the drive to her computer, revealing aerial views of a secluded section of marsh where dozens of nests were clearly visible, inhabited by birds she immediately recognized as Blanding's turtles and eastern spiny softshells, both endangered species that would automatically trigger federal protection under the Endangered Species Act. "You clever boy," she whispered to Ranger, who had settled exhaustedly beside her chair. "You've just changed everything." The emergency injunction hearing was scheduled for Monday morning at the Vermont District Court in Burlington. Over the weekend, Eleanor's cottage became command central for final preparations. Lily arrived Saturday night, accompanied by Professor Harmon, a formidable environmental attorney with 3 decades of experience challenging corporate developments. "The endangered species footage is a game changer," Professor Harmon explained, reviewing their evidence at Eleanor's dining table. "That alone should be enough for an immediate stop work order, but we'll present everything. The judge needs to understand the pattern of deliberate concealment." Eleanor sat beside Ranger, who had spent most of the day recovering from his marsh expedition, his head resting on her lap as she stroked his fur. "What about the anonymous NDC documents? Can we use those?" "Legally questionable," Professor Harmon admitted, "but they help establish context. We'll focus primarily on the Caldwell evidence, which has a clear chain of custody." Lily looked up from her laptop. "Gran, CNN just picked up the story. They're calling it Retired Teacher and Heroic Dog Expose Corporate Environmental Scandal." Eleanor winced at the melodramatic framing. "I'm a biology teacher who understands wetland ecosystems, not some crusading activist." "Actually," Lily grinned, "you're both now." Sunday afternoon brought an unexpected visitor. Eleanor was reviewing her testimony when the doorbell rang. Through the security camera Tom had installed, she saw Margaret Whitfield standing alone on her porch. "You shouldn't speak to her without counsel present," Professor Harmon advised. "She came alone," Eleanor noted. "No security, no lawyers." "That's significant." Against her legal team's objections, Eleanor opened the door. Margaret had aged visibly in just the week since their cafe meeting. New lines etched around her eyes, her usual perfect appearance slightly disheveled. Ranger immediately positioned himself between the two women, his posture alert but not aggressive. "Hello, Margaret," Eleanor said calmly. "This is a surprise. May I come in?" Margaret asked, her voice lacking its usual commanding tone. Eleanor hesitated, then stepped aside. Briefly, in the living room, Margaret declined a seat, standing awkwardly among the evidence boxes and campaign materials. "I see you've built quite an operation. What do you want, Margaret?" "To offer a compromise," she replied. "NDC will completely redesign the water management systems according to environmental recommendations. We'll restore the disturbed wetland areas and create a protected zone for the endangered species habitat." Eleanor studied her former friend carefully. "Why the sudden change of heart?" "The board reviewed our position and decided litigation would be counterproductive." "You mean?" Eleanor translated. "Someone leaked those internal documents and the board is terrified of criminal exposure." Margaret's expression confirmed the assessment. "The offer comes with conditions. NDC admits no wrongdoing. The development proceeds with modifications. All copies of internal documents are returned. And you sign a non-disclosure agreement. Eleanor shook her head slowly. Not good enough. The wetlands need permanent protection, not just promises from a company that's repeatedly demonstrated its willingness to falsify environmental reports. Be reasonable, Ellie. Margaret snapped, her composure cracking. You've made your point. Take the win and go back to your quiet retirement. Like James Caldwell was supposed to take your money and look the other way, Eleanor countered. How much did you offer him before resorting to threats? Margaret's silence was answer enough. Where is he now, Margaret? Eleanor pressed. What happened to the Caldwell family? I don't know, Margaret replied. And for once, Eleanor believed her. After they disappeared, we lost track of them. But you kept searching their property, looking for exactly what Ranger found. Margaret glanced at the German Shepherd, who watched her with unwavering attention. That dog has caused more trouble than you can imagine. I think we're done here, Eleanor said, moving toward the door. We'll see you in court tomorrow. As Margaret reached the porch, she turned back. The board has authorized me to go to $1 million for your silence and cooperation. Eleanor felt a flash of sadness for the idealistic college friend she'd once known. You still don't understand, do you? This was never about money. After Margaret's departure, Eleanor returned to find Ranger standing by the window, tracking the departing car with his eyes. You knew all along, didn't you? She asked him softly. You recognized her from the beginning. Monday morning dawned clear and cold. Eleanor, dressed carefully in a professional navy suit she hadn't worn since her retirement ceremony. As she fastened her mother's pearl necklace, she caught her reflection in the mirror. She looked different somehow, more determined, less willing to fade quietly into the background of life. The courthouse steps were crowded with supporters carrying hand-painted signs about wetland protection. News vans lined the street. Eleanor, flanked by Lily and Professor Harmon with Ranger walking steadily beside her, approached the building with measured steps. Just as they reached the entrance, a commotion erupted at the edge of the crowd. A man pushed through, his eyes fixed on Eleanor and Ranger. He was thin, bearded, but Eleanor recognized him immediately from the family photograph. James Caldwell. Ranger, he called, his voice breaking with emotion. The German Shepherd froze, ears perked forward, then looked up at Eleanor as if seeking permission before bounding toward his original owner. Man and dog collided in a reunion of overwhelming emotion, Ranger whining and circling as James knelt to embrace him. Eleanor felt a complex wave of emotions. Joy at witnessing the reunion, unexpected grief at the prospect of losing Ranger, and confusion about what this meant for their case. James approached her, Ranger pressed against his side. Mrs. Matthews? I'm James Caldwell. I've been following the news from Canada. I had to come, had to thank you for what you're doing. Your evidence made it all possible, Eleanor replied, extending her hand. And Ranger, he's been extraordinary. James smiled, scratching behind the dog's ears. He always was. That's why His voice faltered. That's why I left him behind. I knew he'd find someone who could finish what we started. Before Eleanor could respond, court officers announced the commencement of proceedings. As they entered the courtroom, she noticed James examining her with curiosity. You're exactly who he would choose, he said quietly. Someone who wouldn't back down. Eleanor glanced at Ranger, who now walked between them, connecting his past and present. I never intended to become an activist in my 70s. James smiled. Sometimes we don't choose our battles, Mrs. Matthews. Sometimes they choose us. 6 months later, Eleanor sat on a weathered bench overlooking the newly designated Champlain Wetlands Preserve. Summer wildflowers swayed in the gentle breeze as red-winged blackbirds called from the cattails. Beside her, Ranger dozed contentedly in the sunshine, occasionally opening one eye to track a butterfly or passing hiker. The legal battle had concluded more decisively than anyone anticipated. Once James Caldwell appeared with additional evidence and testimony, the case quickly escalated from a local environmental dispute to a federal investigation. Northeastern Development Corporation settled rather than face criminal charges, agreeing to donate the entire wetlands property for permanent conservation and establishing a substantial restoration fund. Margaret had resigned as CEO the day after the settlement was announced. Eleanor had sent a brief note, not of triumph or recrimination, but of hope that her old friend might rediscover the values they once shared. "Beautiful day," observed a familiar voice. James Caldwell approached along the newly constructed boardwalk, looking healthier than when they'd first met on the courthouse steps. His family had returned to Vermont once the threats subsided, taking up residence in a small house not far from Eleanor's cottage. "Perfect for our ribbon-cutting ceremony," Eleanor agreed, making room for him on the bench. Ranger greeted James with affectionate nudges before settling back at Eleanor's feet. "Adrienne's bringing Mia around 2 o'clock. She's excited about the scholarship fund naming." The James and Eleanor Wetlands Education Fund had been established with a portion of the settlement money, providing opportunities for underprivileged students to study environmental science. The first recipients would be announced at today's ceremony. "How are the night terrors?" Eleanor asked gently. James shrugged. "Better. The therapist says processing the fear is part of healing. Mia still has occasional nightmares about having to flee, but Ranger's visits help." The shared custody arrangement had developed naturally. Ranger spent weekdays with Eleanor and weekends with the Caldwells, a bridge between two households that had become increasingly intertwined. "And how's the new position?" Eleanor inquired. James had been appointed lead scientist for the Wetlands Restoration Project, his reputation fully restored. "Challenging, but fulfilling. We're seeing species return already." The university research team found another turtle nesting site yesterday. Their conversation was interrupted by the approach of Lily, now interning with a prestigious environmental law firm while finishing her degree. "Gran, the governor just arrived, and the film crew wants to do the final interview before the ceremony." The documentary, The Teacher, the Dog, and the Wetlands, had been filming all summer, chronicling both the environmental victory and the community activism it had inspired. "I still don't understand the fuss," Eleanor sighed, smoothing her linen blouse as she stood. "I only did what anyone would do." "That's precisely why people are inspired," James replied. "You showed that ordinary citizens can stand up to powerful interests. You weren't a professional activist or a celebrity champion, just a retired teacher who refused to look away." The ceremony unfolded beneath a cloudless sky, with hundreds of community members gathered around a simple wooden platform. The governor praised the unprecedented coalition of citizens, scientists, and students. Local fishermen described improved catch rates since construction had halted. Children released rehabilitated marsh birds under the guidance of university biologists. When Eleanor's turn came to speak, she approached the microphone with Ranger beside her, his presence still lending her a confidence she'd never expected to develop in her 70s. "6 months ago, I was a retired biology teacher whose most ambitious daily plan was deciding which book to read next," she began, drawing appreciative laughter from those who had known her before. "Today, I stand before you not as an expert or a leader, but as a neighbor who discovered something important. We are never too old to stand up for what matters." She gestured toward the flourishing wetlands behind her. "These marshes have protected our community for thousands of years, filtering our water, mitigating floods, nurturing wildlife. Now, because so many of you joined this fight, we have the privilege of protecting them in return." After the ceremony, as crowds dispersed along the new nature trails, Eleanor found Caroline waiting near her car. "I'm proud of you, Mom," her daughter said, embracing her. "I was worried at first, but you've shown me what courage looks like at any age." "I had a good teacher," Eleanor replied, resting her hand on Ranger's head. That evening, as sunset painted the sky in vibrant oranges and pinks, Eleanor sat on her porch swing with a glass of lemonade, Ranger stretched out beside her. Her cottage had returned mostly to its former orderly state, though maps and environmental journals now shared shelf space with her beloved novels, and a sizable dog bed occupied the prime spot near the fireplace. Her phone rang, the specialized ringtone she'd assigned to the environmental hotline she now operated, helping citizens across Vermont document and challenge potential violations. "Matthews Environmental Advocacy," she answered, reaching for the notebook she kept by the swing. The caller described a troubling situation involving water quality near a manufacturing plant in Rutland. Eleanor asked precise, teacher-like questions, guiding the nervous whistleblower through documentation protocols she'd now mastered herself. "No, you're not overreacting," she assured the caller. "Clean water is everyone's right. I'll connect you with the appropriate resources tomorrow." As she hung up, Eleanor noticed Ranger watching her with those intelligent amber eyes that had first connected with hers across a farmer's market so many months ago. Another busy week ahead, it seems, she told him, scratching behind his ears. Not exactly the quiet retirement I'd planned. Ranger responded with a soft woof that sounded remarkably like agreement. Eleanor gazed across her garden to the wetlands beyond, where fireflies had begun their evening dance over the marshes. The path her life had taken was unexpected, unplanned, yet somehow exactly right. At 68, she had discovered a new purpose, one that honored both her lifetime of teaching and her newfound courage. You know what, Ranger? She mused, as the first stars appeared overhead. Sometimes the best chapters of our stories begin when we think the book is nearly finished. Ranger rested his head on her lap, a gesture that had become the punctuation mark to their shared journey. From strangers to companions to reluctant activists to champions of a cause greater than themselves. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new calls for help, new opportunities to make a difference. But tonight, in the quiet of a Vermont evening, surrounded by the sounds of the wetlands they'd helped save, Eleanor Matthews and her loyal German Shepherd had earned their moment of peace. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and if you've watched all the way through, comment, "I watched until the end," and share your thoughts about this story. Oh, and don't forget to watch the next video that appears in the end screen. It's very emotional.